everybody, I'm Ignacio and today we're gonna make one of my favorite recipes, a cake known as tres leches, which in Spanish means 3 milks. Now this recipe, tres leches, is very well known where I'm from in Texas, and even my wife's family, who's from Honduras, loves this dish. So I think it's really popular in a lot of the Spanish-speaking world, particularly in the American Southwest, Mexico, and Central America. But when we moved as a family to Prince George about 3.5 years ago and started to get to know people, when we would bring this dish into people's homes, for a lot of people, that was the first time that they had ever had it. And what they always told us was, this is so delicious. I can't believe I've never heard of this. So this holiday season, what I thought I'd do is show you how to make this cake. To be honest, I've never made this cake. My wife is the one who's always made it, but I'm told it's a very forgiving recipe. So I figured let's learn together. I'll show you how I make tres leches, we'll see how it turns out, and hopefully you can do the same thing later on at home. You can have this cake during the holiday season or any time of year really. If you want an excuse to eat something very sweet, very delicious, then tres leches is go-to dish. So let's make it, tres leches. So the first thing we're gonna do is prepare the dry ingredients. I've taken my bowl from my mixer stand, put it on a scale, and I'm going to put about 450 grams of cake flour. Just go ahead and pour that. It's quite a bit, as you see. Next, we're going to put the sugar, about 2 1/4 cups or 480 grams. Did I mention this cake was going to be sweet? Next, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder. 1 and 2. And then we will add 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. Just a little extra, just to enhance the flavor. Okay, so at this point, what you're gonna wanna do is start pushing everything through the sift. And to make it a little easier, I'm gonna take it off the scale here. Use a little bit of brute force. Once everything's in there, it'll be less lumpy because the sift will have broken up those bigger chunks into really small pieces. And so you'll have a more consistent flavor. Now we're gonna make the wet ingredients. First thing I'm gonna do is take 1/3 cup of sour cream, put it in here. Now I'm told you can use other ingredients like yogurt, or if you wanted to use buttermilk, the recipe still works with that. Like I said, it's supposed to be a pretty forgiving recipe. Then 1.5 cups of whole milk at room temperature. Pour that in there, try not to make a mess. Then 1 tablespoon of pure vanilla extract. Try to use the natural stuff, not the artificial stuff. I know it's expensive, but it really pays off in the recipe. Next, you'll need 8 egg whites. So crack the egg open and just try to scoop the yolk back and forth. Again, I'm doing these eggs at room temperature. A lot of these ingredients I'm doing at room temperature. It just makes it easier for the stuff to mix well. I'm gonna clean my hands a little bit. Feeling of those eggs, and then you just mix them together. So you get rid of any lumps in there. You want it to be as smooth as possible. At this point, I'm gonna move aside the wet ingredients for just a moment and go back to working with the dry ingredients. Put that back on the mixer stand. Move that a little bit this way so it's closer to me. Well, now that I have this here, what I want to do is I want to put 17 tablespoons of butter into here. It's a lot. That's roughly 2 sticks. In fact, it's 2 sticks of butter plus a little more. And instead of doing that all at once, we will do it one at a time. And I'll put it in the mixer, lock it in there, turn it on low, and just add it in there. What we're making here is now the beginning of the cake batter, and the butter, the job it does is that it sticks to the flour And apart from making the cake moister, also allows the gluten not to form as much, so that the cake doesn't feel as tough and bready. Instead, it's very soft and again, really moist. This is one of those cakes it's not like the store-bought cakes. Once you eat it, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of milk in it, hence tres leches. Again, the butter's at room temperature. That makes it a lot easier for the butter to blend into the flour, so it's not as crumbly. When I get to the halfway point, I will actually let it mix a little bit, and then I will stop it really briefly and lift a little bit. And the only thing I'm trying to do here now is just go in there and make sure that everything's getting mixed, right? There's some stuff at the bottom that if you just leave it there, just sort of gets crushed down there, and we want all of it to mix well together. So I'm just scooping things around on my end to help with that. Put it back in, lock it, start it again. I'm doing it on very low. Just keep adding the butter. Now we're going to mix the wet ingredients with the dry ingredients, but we're not gonna do it all at once. We're gonna do half of it, mix it up, lift this up, scrape a little bit to make sure everything's mixing well, and then do the second half. Okay? So just mix it up one last time to make sure that there aren't any clumps that have formed since then. And I will lock this. Oop, it was unlocked, so now I'm locking it. I'll turn it on, again on slow. Pour in just about half. Turn that off. Just lift that just a little bit. Scrape this stuff off. Make sure that stuff on the bottom doesn't stay on the bottom. So just move things around. Okay, that was supposed to fall in there. Okay, and that is your cake batter. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna put the cake mix into this 13 by 9 cake pan. But before we do that, instead of pouring it directly into the pan, we're gonna put it on some parchment paper because that'll make it easier to take out later on. So apparently there's a trick to this. I've done it before, but I saw it in a video and it seemed to work, so I'm gonna try it now. You put the parchment paper on top of the cake pan and then cut the corners here. Just doing my best. Okay, and so apparently when I take the parchment paper out and I flip this over, I can fold the parchment paper like where I cut, basically. Okay, and then when I put it in the pan, I can just fold that section in. Just pour it in. Let's fill up that entire cake pan as well as we can. Some stuff left in there, but not much. Okay, so here we've poured all the batter in here. We've set the oven to 350 degrees. We're gonna put it in there for about 40 minutes. At that point, we'll take it out and we'll know it's ready because when you put a toothpick into it and it comes out with nothing sticking to it, that means that the cake itself is done. So let's put it in the oven and then come back. So now it's the time to make the part of the recipe that gives the whole cake its name, tres leches, which means 3 milks. And it's called that because we use whole milk, evaporated milk, and condensed milk. We'll mix all of those things together. So let's start with the roughly 1 cup of whole milk, 3/4 to a cup. It really just depends on how milky you want it to be. Put that in there. Then we'll take 1 can. This is 354 milliliter can of evaporated milk, so let's pour that in there as well. And then the most indulgent part of the recipe is 1 regular can, 300 milliliters of condensed milk. This is super sweet, so if you are on a diet, tres leches cake isn't for you, but if you are trying to make yourself a memorable holiday treat, then this is an essential ingredient in this recipe. I often use a spoon to scoop it out because it's so rich that sometimes it takes a little bit of extra scooping to get all that gooey goodness out of the can. And those 3 milk dairy products are, again, what gives this recipe its name, tres leches. Mix it really well because the condensed milk, especially that you saw at the end, it's heavier and thicker. So if you left it alone, it would just settle at the bottom, and you don't want that. You want those 3 milks to really mix in together. You don't have to mix too much, just enough to sense that that everything is all blended together and that none of that yummy, gooey condensed milk has stuck at the bottom. So that is your tres leches. Now I'm going to bring the cake and combine it with this tres leches mixture. I've taken the cake over here. It's cooled. I took it out of the oven, made sure it was ready. It's not warm anymore, so you can see it here. And remember how we use this parchment paper? Well, now I'm going to try to take it out. Put it on this cooling rack. And take it, that parchment paper, come around it without really breaking apart the cake. One of the things that tres leches cake is known for, in terms of the presentation, is that it's very light and white. And so one of the ways we're going to achieve that is we're going to cut the edges of the crust to give it that white look, and then later I'm actually going to try to cut a little bit of the top, because later on in the video I'll show you that we put icing over it, so it'll be covered anyways. But apart from the aesthetics of having the cake appear to be very light and white, when you take off the crust, the next step that follows, you'll see, is where we pour that tres leches mixture over the entire cake. And so it's easier for the cake to absorb those liquids and that gooey richness if you take off the crust. So I'm gonna start off the edges. Set that aside. That's still delicious. You can still eat it, but it just won't be part of your cake itself. Do that on all 4 sides. And then on the top from here, just take your time. You don't want to rush this. It's better to do it correctly and slowly than to do it really quickly and mess everything up. But again, this is a pretty forgiving recipe, so just take your time, peel off that top layer. Doesn't matter if it crumbles, because that's not part of our presentation. That same pan that I used earlier, I can put the cake back in there very, very carefully. Set that aside. Bring that back. And the next step is, I forgot to grab it, so I'll be back in a second. I'm gonna grab a fork and I'm gonna start punching holes in this. So give me 1 second. Just punching holes here and there, just to make it easier for that tres leches to sink in. Okay, set that aside, and then let me grab my tres leches, mix that one more time to make sure that richness is there. And I start pouring it, not all at once. We do it slowly. And you'll just watch it absorb it like a sponge. And that is the point, after all. All of that puddle of gooey sweetness has to be saturated and sucked into the spongy cake. And only then, after you put on the frosting and some toppings, will your tres leches cake be ready. So for now, let's be patient. Let's put this in the refrigerator. Let's check in a couple of hours.
For the frosting, take 3 cups of whipping cream and mix with ½ cup of confectioner's sugar. If you're feeling indulgent, add a splash of vanilla and fold in some mascarpone cheese, about 475 grams.
I'm gonna scoop some whipping cream. Then this is just like a quick, easy way to put it on. Okay, so that now that I have that in there, you probably have something else to use. I'm just gonna improvise with this cake tool. I'm just gonna smother that nicely over the top of the cake. But I'm almost done. At this point, if I wanted to, I could cut my first slice. Let's put that here. Now, that cake is, it's presentable for me. It is a little simple, but often what you'll find with the tres leches is you'll see people slice little bits of strawberry. Oops. Put that on top of their cake in a much more presentable manner, and maybe add a sprig of mint. And then I'm gonna eat it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed following along as I made this tres leches recipe. Like I said, I never made this before, so I really didn't have the highest expectations. It's supposed to be a forgiving recipe, and let's see how good it is. I have the sense it's gonna taste just fine. That'll do just fine. Thank you for watching. Happy holidays from the library to yours. Stay safe, stay healthy.